Jayo Jamunatiravanachari Jayo Kunja Bihari Jayo Jamunatiravanachari Jayo Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Madhava Kunja Bihari Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Granthrat Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudhirayet. Hare Krishna, good morning. So we'll do in English. We are reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, fourth canto, which is the creation of the fourth order. And we are in chapter number 2. Chapter number 2. Text 32. So the name of this chapter is Daksha curses Lord Shiva. And I'll read the word by word first in Sanskrit, and then we will read line by line. And you can respond. Tad Brahma Paramang Shudham Satang Vardma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pashandam Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat Tad Brahma Paramam Shudam Tad Brahma Paramam Shudam Satang Vatma Sanatanam Satam Vatma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pasandham Vigarhya Yata Pasandham Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat Tad Brahma Paramam Shudam Satam Vatma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pashandam Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat Tad Brahma Paramam Shudham Tad Brahma Paramam Shudham Satam Vatma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pashandam Bambo Yatra Bhutarat Tad Brahma Paramam Shudham Satam Vatma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pashandam Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat. Ladies, Brahma Paramam Shudham Satam Vatma Sanatanam Tad Brahma Paramam Shudham Satam Vatma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pashandam Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat. Anybody else? Tad Brahma Paramam Shudham Satam Vatma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pasandham Daivam Vo Yatra Bhutarat. Thank you very much. So we'll read now word by word translation into English. Please repeat. Tat, that. Brahma, the Veda. Paramam, supreme. Shudham, pure. Satam, of the saintly persons. Vardma, path. Sanatanam, eternal. Vigarhya, blaspheming. Yata, should go. Pashandam, to atheism. Daivam, deity. Vaha, your. Yatra, where. Bhutarat, the Lord of the Bhutas. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. By blaspheming the principles of the Vedas, which are the pure and supreme path of the saintly persons, certainly you, followers of Bhutapati, Lord Shiva, will descend to the standard of atheism without a doubt. Purport. Lord Shiva is described here as Bhutarat. The ghosts and those who are situated in the material mode of ignorance are called Bhutas. So Bhutarat refers to the leader of the creatures who are in the lowest standard of the material modes of nature. Another meaning of Bhuta is anyone who has taken birth or anything which is produced. So in that sense, Lord Shiva may be accepted as the father of this material world. Here, of course, Bhrigu Muni takes Lord Shiva as the leader of the lowest creatures. The characteristics of the lowest class of men have already been described. They do not bathe, they have long hair on their heads, and are addicted to intoxicants. In comparison with the path followed by the followers of Bhutarat, the Vedic system is certainly excellent, for it promotes people to spiritual life as the highest eternal principle of human civilization. If one decries or blasphemes the Vedic principles, then he falls to the standard of atheism. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyanangyana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Sriyuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopipakanta Radhakanta Namostate Jayatam Surato Pangor Mamamanda Matergati Matsarvasva Padambujo Radhamadana Mohano Divyat Vrindaranya Kalpadru Mada Srimad Radangara Simhasanasto Srimad Radha Srila Govinda Deva Prishtalevi Savyamano Smarami Shrimandra Sarasaram Vibham Siva Tadatastitaha Karsham Venu Swanai Gopir Gopinata Shriyastunaha Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll read again the verse. Tad Brahma Paramam Shudam Satam Vartma Sanatanam Vigarhya Yata Pashandam Daivam Yo Yatra Bhutarat. By blaspheming the principles of the Vedas, which are the pure and supreme path of the saintly person, certainly you, followers of Bhutapati, Lord Shiva, will descend to the standard of atheism without a doubt. So this is maybe a little bit confusing for those who don't know what is happening here now. But this is in the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the name of this chapter is Daksha curses Lord Shiva. So in the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is this very spectacular story of this confrontation, or you could say, how you say in English, you could say confrontation between Daksha and Shiva. So Daksha and Shiva are two very great personalities, but in different positions. So family-wise, actually at this point, Lord Shiva was the son-in-law of Daksha. Son-in-law. So technically, you could say by social norms, he would be in a lower position, since Daksha would be his father-in-law. And you should give some respect to your father-in-law. It's good for family relationships, you know. But on an absolute, from the point of view of an absolute point of view, Shiva is no ordinary person. Shiva, according to the Bhagavatam, he's described as having 84 of the qualities of Param Brahma Vishnu. So 84% of the qualities. A normal Jiva Atma like you and me, we can attain up to 78% of the qualities of Vishnu. And Vishnu himself, Narayana, is considered to have 96% of the qualities of Krishna, and Krishna would be 100%. So this categorization is given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Lord Shiva is actually a tattva of himself, of his own. Tattva, the word tattva, sometimes it's translated as truth, but the word tattva actually implies much more. This is one of the typical Sanskrit non-translatables. There's no equal term in English for the word tattva. So tattva, you could say, means the reality, the category, the truth of something or somebody. So we have Vishnu tattva, we have Shiva tattva, and we have Jiva tattva. And of course we also have the Panchabhuta tattva and also many other tattvas describing in the Sankhya philosophy the different aspects of material nature. But in relation to the main categories of living entities, we have Jiva tattva, Shiva tattva, and Vishnu tattva. These are the three types of living entities that exist. Of course there's also Shakti tattva, but Shakti tattva is a different story altogether. So Jiva tattvas are common living entities, you know, like you and me, like a tree, a frog, you know, a piece of grass, an ancient tree. All of these are Jiva tattvas, you know. Indra Gopa is considered to be in the Sanskrit language the smallest. It's like a small microbe, you know, a tiny, small, invisible, you know, living entity, up to Indra or Brahma, you know. All of these are Jiva tattvas, you know, different living entities, which appear in 8,400,000 different species of life. So 8,400,000 different species of life. And this number for many people might seem very random, and many people might even doubt, you know, its veracity. Is it true, you know, 8,400,000 species of life? But of course, if you are following the Vedic tradition, you might accept it, you know, based on the authority of the Vedas. But one time when I was a young brahmachari, I was traveling and we were filling gas, and I had some time to read magazines, you know. So usually a brahmachari should not, you know, read the magazines, you know. He should be focused chanting or something. But somehow I ended up in the gas station in the magazine section, and I was reading magazines. And I was reading this very nice German magazine. It's called Geo. Maybe you know it. It's like German National Geographic, kind of. And in this magazine, they were talking about this national park in South America, in Peru, which is called Manu, Manu National Park. And this national park received this name, Manu National Park, because Manu, as you might know, is in the Vedic tradition the father of humanity or all living entities. So they gave this national park this name because of the huge variety of living entities, you know, of species that you can find there. And this is one of the main areas where scientists search for new species. You know? So I forgot the exact numbers, but more or less every day they were writing this article in this only in this specific national park, which is a pretty big area. It's like a basin between Brazil and Peru. They find, I think, 2 or 3 dozen of new species. Every day they find 2 to 3 dozen of new species. And then of course there's a few other areas like that. There's the Congo area in Africa and Southeast Asia and India. There are also some areas where there's a lot of, places where there's with a huge variety of different species of life. And then in this article, they were talking about how scientists are trying to estimate how many living species there are. Especially because they have realized that many species seem to extinguish even before they can find them. So they realize that just by, searching them and finding them is not enough. They need to use some mathematical calculations to try to estimate, how many might have been or could be in total. And at that point, this is maybe, 15, 20 years ago, the data, the official scientific data was that they had counted around 2.8 million different species. But of course the number was increasingly, was kept growing always. And also they realized that many species might not have been there anymore, but might have been there in the past. So according to different calculations, they reached to the number of 12 million or 9 million. And then they mentioned in this article, and His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada says that there are 8,400,000 species of life according to Vedic tradition. And they thought it was a very interesting, number because it fits the, some of the estimates for sure. But of course, the descriptions we find in the Vedic tradition and the Puranas also give detail about the breakdown of those 8,400,000. So I forgot all the numbers, but there's supposed to be 400,000 different human species. 1.1 million different insect species, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of detail, and what I have when we study Vedic tradition and we look at history, one very clear pattern that we can see is that many of these very ancient, you could say, statements about numbers and also time scales, especially time scales also, you will find that in modern times we have been approaching those numbers more and more. Not too long ago in the Western world, people were convinced that the earth is only 6,000 years old. This was the common Christian dogma. If you calculate, from Abraham, all the different descendants that were there from between Abraham and Adam and Eve, and they more or less say 6,000, 5,000 years. And there are still some Christians who are convinced, the world is only 5,000 years old. But with the progress of science, they realized, no, it must be much older. So they estimated a few 100,000 years, then 1800s, a few million, and then a few billion. But of course, in the Puranas, you will find numbers, in the trillions. According to the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, in one day of Brahma, 1,000 Divya Yugas reoccur. So that means that the lifespan of Brahma, the lifespan of the universe, would be something around 311 trillion years. So when the Western people first heard these numbers, when they came to India, they thought, Indians have a very fantastic imagination. But the reality is that these numbers are, for us, of course, we accept the authority of the Puranas, so we accept them as true. But just also from a neutral point of view, science has been, approaching these numbers more and more. So there are 3 different categories of living entities. The normal living entities like you and me, we can be reincarnated, within this world in 8,400,000 different species. It's a constant cycle, And within this cycle, there is one very important rule. One is the rule of evolution of consciousness, karma, and also the position of the human form of life. So the position of the human form of life is emphasized very much in the Vedas as the transitory position where you can, with your free will, either elevate yourself or degrade yourself. You know, according to your actions, you either can elevate yourself or degrade yourself. Whereas in the lower positions, you know, especially plant life, animal life, you are in a evolution of consciousness. So depending on of how low you degrade yourself, then automatically there is a learning curve that increases your level of consciousness, and you evolve more and more again. So this is also another very interesting aspect of the Vedas, that the Vedas very clearly talk about evolution of consciousness. So that means that there is an evolutionary process from very, simple living entities, from the, aquatic living entities, beginning with aquatic living entities, then plants, living entities of the land, to human beings, and even, beyond that. And it's interesting that just 150 years ago, by chance, Mr. Darwin found the same sequence, but he thought it's by exclusion, by the power of the survival of the fittest. But the idea in the Vedas is, of course, that all of these living forms always exist. Just at different times they're manifested more or less. So in the Kali Yuga, we have a great decimation of living species. So, we might not even be able to see all living entities that might have existed in the past and will exist again in the future. Or are existing somewhere else in the universe as well. So, if I lost my red thread now. What was I saying before? Tattvas, yes, thank you very much. No, I was trying to explain something else. Give me 1 second. I'm a little bit sick, so consciousness, evolution of consciousness. So, according to the Vedas, this change in form doesn't happen by the survival of the fittest, but by a learning curve in each living form. So, let's say if you are a small cat, you learn to be a cat. So you are ready to be a bigger cat, for example. And there are very detailed descriptions, of what sequence and how, living entities evolve from one living form to the next. Shri Shri Prahlad Lakshmana Singari Bhagavan Ki Jai. So, yes, survival of the fittest against an evolution of consciousness from one life to the next. So, of course, if you don't, if you have a materialistic point of view, it cannot be, from one point of, from one life to the next, because they see each living form isolated from their past. Each living form is just an organic manifestation that then vanishes into nothingness. But according to our understanding, the definition of life is not just a combination of biological, chemical, and physical, you could say, reactions. But the definition of life for us is Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means eternal, Chit means consciousness, and Ananda means blissful. That is the definition of life according to the Vedas. And that is also our experience. We don't feel just like a bunch of biological mass and physical reactions. We have so many emotions, we have intelligence, we have consciousness, we have convictions, we have all of this, desires, thoughts, and emotions are very powerful. The emotional state is so powerful that it can influence the the body. You can clearly see it. Somebody becomes very angry, they become body temperature increases, and they get a red head. Or if somebody's depressed, like if there's very heavy depression, people can get sick. Just from depression, the body can develop tumors. I have a few friends who were living in a very toxic relationship for many, many years, and that resulted in them developing a tumor in their stomach. Directly a result of just emotions. So emotions, you could say, the subtle plane has a direct influence, even like you'd say a predominant influence on anything of a lower level. So in the Sankhya philosophy, the hierarchy is very clearly stated. Also in the Bhagavad Gita, we have the 5 material elements, earth, water, air, fire, ether, and then we have mind, intelligence, and ego. And these 8 elements are in a very clear hierarchy. And unlike one might assume, actually the elements of a more subtle quality are more powerful. So mind above matter, you could say, or mind above gross matter. So the power of the mind is incredibly powerful. We cannot taste it, we cannot smell it, we cannot touch it, we cannot see the mind, but it's there, and it's very powerful. It's our emotions, it's our thoughts, our convictions, our desires, etc. And Satchidananda Swami always tells this very incredible story. His father told him when he was a young boy, made a big impression on him, because his father was managing the German Deutsche Bahn in Hamburg. And it occurred once that one of the workers locked himself in one of those freezer wagons. So it's like a coach, which is like a gigantic refrigerator. So he thought, I'm going to die. It's a refrigerator, I'm going to die. And the next morning, or I don't know how many hours later, he was rescued, and he had, burning, frostbite. Frostbite. It means different parts of his fingers and also nose were dead. And he had a real frostbite, and it means it just falls off, and but now the point in the story is that the freezer wagon was not turned on. But he was convinced he's in a freezer wagon, so he got frostbite. So that's the power of the mind. And of course, in a positive way also, if you have a very powerful mind, you can control people, you can inspire people, you can influence people in a positive way as well. Or you can elevate your consciousness, you can elevate yourself to a higher platform. So, yes, we are in this category. The samsara, there's a cycle of birth and death. As humans, we can decide if we go up or down. Animals don't have this choice. Animals, some animal forms are not vegetarian. That's their makeup, that's their instinct, and they don't incur any bad karma. If a tiger slaughters a cute deer, there is no karma for the tiger. It's his nature. But as humans, we have a choice. You go hunting, or you just eat some, civilized agriculture produce. So we have this choice, and because we have a choice, we have a responsibility as well. Then we have Shiva and Brahma himself. Out of the 3 guna avatars, Brahma is in the category of Jiva Tattva. So then we have Shiva Tattva. Shiva, like it's described here, he is the father of this material world. He's Maheshvara. So he's the predominant deity actually within the material realm. He's directly married to Prakriti, to Shakti, to Maya Devi or Vaishnavi, so many names, Uma. In almost any traditional culture, there is a rite of worshipping Mother Goddess, the Mother Goddess, Mother Nature. In South America, where I was born, there is a very strong rite of Pachamama. So whenever you eat something in South America, traditional culture is still there. Whenever they eat something or drink something, first they put a little bit on the earth, say Pachamama, for Mother Earth. So Mother Nature is the wife of Lord Shiva. So he's in direct contact, with material nature. And in that sense, he differentiates himself from Vishnu. Vishnu is Vasudeva. Vasudeva means never in touch with material energy, whereas Shiva consciously goes into a connection with material energy, Prakriti, in the form of Devi. But that doesn't mean that he is influenced by the lower modes of nature. Technically, the guna avatars are responsible for each one of the three gunas. So Vishnu is in charge of the mode of sattva guna, Shiva is in charge of tamaguna, and Brahma is in charge of rajaguna. So Brahma has as the secondary creator, has the duty to procreate, to populate the universe, and manage creation. Whereas Shiva has the duty of destruction, annihilation, for a renewal, and Vishnu is taking care of sustenance. But that doesn't mean that Shiva is in the mode of ignorance. He's not in the mode of ignorance. He's just managing that aspect of material creation. And Shiva very easily can be misunderstood. Very easily people will misunderstand Shiva. Some people in the Western world especially, they think Shiva is female. They think it's a female goddess. There are some computer games, and you can choose the character of Shiva, and it's some weird idea of a female mixture of Shiva and Kali or something. And in India also there's different ideas, who Shiva is, Maheshvara. Some people approach Shiva especially for material boons, because he's known to be Ashutosh. Ashutosh means very easily pleased, and that is true. So Shiva is very liberal. Shiva is extremely liberal. He's very liberal. He will... Anybody who approaches him, it doesn't matter his qualification, his background, his intentions, good or bad, he will reciprocate. So that's the nature of Shiva. And that's why he's very often approached by all kind of not so well-meaning people. And in a different part of this section of the Bhagavatam, it's described how it's the special mercy of Lord Shiva, that he takes, those who usually wouldn't get shelter or wouldn't be able to make spiritual progress. Lord Shiva is the one who, you could say, takes care of them, gives them some blessing. He gives them association and some form of blessing. Even their habits might not be very good, like it's described here. Basically, it's put as the opposing Vedic principles, So there's the Vedic standard of sattva guna, pure life, conscious living, non-violent living, etc. And opposing that would be the followers of Shiva. Of course, the different types of followers of Shiva. There are very elevated yogis, and Brahmin traditions, who follow very high standard, of purity as well. But still, specifically this verse, this specific verse we just read today, is actually not an ordinary verse. This is a curse. So what is actually happening now in this story, there is cursing and counter-cursing. So the story is actually that there was a big assembly, and Daksha, who's a Prajapati, or you could say a patriarch, somebody who begets many children, under the authority of Brahma, he's populating the universe. So Daksha enters this assembly and everybody immediately stands up. Like in this area of Germany, there is still some culture. So in school, when the teacher enters, everybody stands up and says, "Guten Morgen, Herr Autengruber," and then they sit down again. In other parts of Germany, that's long lost. When the teacher enters, everybody just ignores the teacher. But in a similar way, everybody stood up to greet Daksha, except Shiva. Shiva was just sitting in meditation, completely oblivious, of what was happening around him. So it wasn't even ill-intentioned or out of ego. He just didn't even notice that Daksha had entered. But Daksha took it as a great offense. He took it as a great offense. And then cursing and counter-cursing started. Shiva, in this whole story, it's very interesting. In this whole story, even it revolves around him. Actually, he was not really involved in this cursing and counter-cursing. Shiva is described at one point, he just stood up and left. But his followers, especially Nandishvara, Nandishvara is the Vahana of Shiva in the form of a bull, he took great offense. So he started cursing the Brahmanas for insulting Shiva. And then Brigu, as the leader of the guru of the demigod, starting cursing the followers of Shiva. So it was cursing and counter-cursing. And technically, Krishna Kshetra Maharaj gave a lecture on this section of the Bhagavatam recently, and he said this is one of those sections that you could say give an explanation of why things are the way they are. Like there's other stories, for example, let's say that Brahmins might tend to be poor, because there used to be a curse at one point. And a similar way, the curse that is very clearly spoken here is that the followers of Shiva, who do not adhere to Vedic principles, will become atheists, without a doubt. That's the curse that is spoken here. And when I was young, and I was also actually strongly attracted to Lord Shiva, because I realized, I was a young teenager, I was not into following any rules and regulations, but I knew Shiva is kind, Shiva is cool. So you approach Shiva, and Shiva will always reciprocate in some way or other, for sure. And if you have a genuine intention, he might even lead you towards spiritual life. Because Shiva is also described in the Bhagavatam as Vaishnavanam Yatha Shambhu. He's actually the highest among the Vaishnavas as well. So, but I knew many people, in this, there's different scenes, of music in Germany, and there's one scene in Germany is techno, electronic music, and Goa, and there are many people love Shiva, they like Shiva. There's even one big event, it's called Shiva Moon, very big techno rave party, Shiva Moon. And many of those people, even they appreciate Shiva, their behavior is not Vedic, for sure not. So you can see how they actually degrade themselves. There is a clear degradation, and they ultimately become atheists. And also in India, of course, there is there's the Aghori Babas who very consciously focus on you could say they have a very clear philosophical idea about the temporary nature of matter. So that's why they consciously, you could say, attack the norm, So whatever is the norm, they attack it, So people usually want to, live very, comfortably, and they sleep in, in the crematories, Usually people want to eat from something like a nice, golden plate or stainless steel, or porcelain or something. And they eat and they drink from the skulls, just to remind themselves of death. So because they want to very strongly impose that idea or make it clear, we are temporary. We are temporarily here in this world. We very easily fall under the illusion that we'll be here forever. And this illusion comes from a natural instinct, because as a soul, as Atma, we are Sat, we are eternal. Consciousness, energy can never go to waste. That's a philosophical law. that energy is never lost. It only transforms. So obviously, our emotions, desires, and thoughts are very powerful energies that create and do so much harm or benefit. So when the body dies, it only makes sense that all these emotions, desires, and thoughts have to go somewhere. They cannot just vanish into nothingness. This consciousness has to transform into something else. And that's, of course, the logic behind reincarnation. Now I've lost my path again. What was the saying before? Yes, energy is never lost. That I already explained. And we were talking about Shiva. We're talking about... Yes, now we're talking about the Aghori Babas. So Shiva is the role model of the Aghori Babas. Shiva, even he is such a divine personality, and actually full of opulence. In the Bhagavatam, at a later area, the description of Kailash is given. Because after this big duel of cursing and counter-cursing, the demigods then want to go and pacify Shiva. So they go to Kailash, and the description of Kailash is given. It's extremely opulent, so beautiful and so opulent. But Shiva himself, he's not opulent, He has matted hair, and he covers his golden form with ashes, and he carries a garland of skulls. Why? Because he's trying to remind us that this world is temporary. He's absolutely not touched by material energy. Even he's smearing himself with the ashes of dead bodies. He's not impure because of that. And of course, if somebody imitates Lord Shiva, that can easily become something very twisted and not proper. But the point Lord Shiva is making is still there. That it's similar, like in Buddhism also there is this tradition of the Book of the Dead. You might have heard, the Book of the Dead, quite famous. Because the whole idea is to confront the reality that you all have to die. I'm really sorry, I have bad news for you. You will all die. Me also. And for many people, that's very bad taste. How could you say that? It's almost impolite. But when you have the point of view and understanding that the only thing that is dying is the body and not the soul, then death is very different. And the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is giving this very clear and strong indication, and he says, Dehinasmin yata dehe kaumaram jovanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyati. So dhira is the key word. We should remain sober in the face of death. We should know we're dying. We should know this body will die. It's reality. It's part of life. But death does not have to be a traumatic experience. Not at all. Dhiras tatra namoyati. Somebody who has knowledge, for him death is a transition. And the logic Krishna is using there is very simple. He says just like a small child, has a body, and then there's a youngster and an old person. So the Atma has remained the same. The consciousness also has remained the same. Only the consciousness is changing and evolving. The Atma that is, animating the consciousness is steady. Even our consciousness changes. You might change your religion. You might change your gender even. You might change all kinds of things you can change. But the Atma behind, that doesn't change. So that's the logic, that the Atma doesn't change, and therefore when we die, we understand it as a changing of vehicle. Just like an old vehicle, you go to the car dealer and get a new one. In a similar way, you can change bodies. We are changing bodies. And therefore, you could say this is the foundation for the universal thought of Vedic tradition. Universal Vedic tradition is based on this understanding. You cannot be universal if you are identifying with your body. If you think you're Indian, if you think you're African, if you think you're male, female, etc., etc., short, long, fat, brighter skin, darker skin. If you think that's you, then you're trapped, completely trapped. If you want to have a universal, view, an equal view of all living entities, if you want to be egalitarian, if you want to be fair, you need to view living entities as separated from their bodies. Only then you can pay respect to anyone and everyone. Because we're not paying respect to their body, we're paying respect to the person. Even the behavior of somebody, we don't consider it to be part of the person. In the Bhagavad Gita, very clearly, Krishna explains that he says, Ahankara vimudatma kartahamiti manyate. Under the influence of Ahankara, false ego, Ahankara means you think I am this body. Ahankara means I am black, I am white, I am rich, I am this, I am that. All of this is Ahankara. So when Ahankara takes over, we think ourselves the doers. But in reality, Krishna says, all interaction in matter, all modes of emotion, of action, are controlled by the modes of nature. The three gunas, they influence us. We think we decide, oh, now I'm going to bed. No, you're tired. You have to go to bed. Oh, now I'm going to eat. No, you have to eat. Otherwise, you will starve. And so on. The modes of nature are very powerful. And of course, there's a whole science, and the whole idea of yoga is to learn to transcend the modes of nature. Because ultimately, we, the soul, we are beyond the modes of nature. And it's only matter, it's the material body that is made and driven, controlled, influenced, and conditioned by these three modes of nature. Yes. Now I lost again my track. I'm really sorry, I'm so tired. Yes, thank you. So when we change bodies, what is changing is only the external layer. It's only the material layer, it's only the modes of nature. And what I was trying to say is that when we have this understanding that first of all living entities are equal on the spiritual plane. We're all Satchitananda. So this fundamental egalitarian idea is there already. And then even when somebody acts in a very unfair way, attacking you, insulting you, or being very unfair or unreasonable or whatever it is, you should understand that it's not the person. It's the modes of nature. It's the modes of nature that are conditioning. This person is in such a way conditioned that he has to act in a certain way. It's like if a dog barks at you, you shouldn't wonder. It's a dog. They will not praise you. It's a dog. In a similar way, different people have a different consciousness, and they will act according to the modes of nature, according to their conditioning. So if you have this view, you can be forgiving. You won't take offense. It's very, very important. So you could say that philosophical and the paradigm shift, how we perceive reality, comes from understanding these fundamental ideas. That we are eternal, we are Atma, and we are controlled. Our bodies that we temporarily have are controlled by these three modes. And the whole idea of spiritual life is learning how to elevate oneself within these three modes of nature. So these three modes of nature are natural, but at the same time, while they serve a purpose, they also have a certain, you could say, trajectory of influence. So the mode of ignorance is good because you need to sleep at one point. But if you sleep too much, or if you overindulge, if you become addicted to something, dependent on any substance, it might be sugar, or heroin. If you become addicted to something or dependent on something, then by default you will become sick, you will become lethargic, you will fall into tamas. And Rajaguna can elevate the mode of ignorance. So if somebody is very lethargic, not at all motivated, lazy, depressed, if there is Rajaguna, if there is a strong desire to accomplish something, to do something, then it's beneficial. So Rajaguna can elevate the mode of ignorance. But Rajaguna by itself, because it's driven by desires, tends to slip very easily into Tamaguna. Rajaguna means you're very active. You want to taste. You want to enjoy. You want to, and then very easily you get trapped. In an addiction, for example, or it's something tastes so good. You overeat. And then Tamaguna again. There's one very crass example I read once about a German student. He wasn't even a student, he was a school-going kid, in gymnasium. He was something 11th grade or 12th grade. And he realized he's really good at stocks, trading. He's like, why should I finish school? I'll just go to London and I'll trade. So he went to London, and within a week he died. Because he became so overwhelmed, by the possibilities. And, when you start trading, and you could do, I don't know, what is it called? When you bet on the loss of somebody, you can earn a lot of money. I forgot what it's called. Short selling or something. Anyway, the point is that he got so excited and his money was growing so fast. He couldn't sleep a whole week. And then he died. So that's passion quickly slipping into ignorance, destruction. So those two lower modes of nature need to always be balanced by the mode of sattva guna. Discipline, health, sattvic food, very important. But ideally even, of course, sattvic food that has been, blessed, offered, that is prasadam. If we have the balance of sattva guna, rajaguna and tamaguna will fulfill their purpose, naturally. And of course, there might be somebody who is completely in a mode of goodness. But within matter, the mode of goodness will always have, in a negative sense, a tinge of passion and ignorance. That means that somebody who is in a mode of goodness can also easily become proud, for example. They think, I'm so healthy, I'm vegan, I only eat organic foods, I'm such an amazing person. Look at all this, low lives, who are, meat eaters and still eating at McDonald's, I can't believe it, how can they eat fast food, So if you become proud, or also maybe you are very generous, altruistic, you're giving donations. So basically the mode of goodness is only, material mode of goodness is influenced or conditioned by the sensation that you are happy in this world. So you can, by the mode of goodness, you can create such a high level of, you could say, well-being within matter that you forget that you are within matter. And at any moment you can slip into the two other modes of nature. So it's very common that people who, in Germany it's called to rest on your, auf die eigenen Lorbeeren ruhen. So Lorbeeren means, wie sagt man Lorbeer auf English? Bay leaves, laurel, like in the European culture, the Caesar, the emperor of the Romans, had a bay leaf, crown. So if you had this crown, you were the boss, So in German, the saying is that you should not rest on those leaves, meaning you should not rest on your achievements. If you think you're good, you can't get any better. And good is quite high. According to the Vedas, like we mentioned before, any Jiva Atma can achieve 78% of the qualities and consciousness of Krishna himself. And that's a lot. In the Vedic scriptures, there's a description also that each individual Atma, which is in each individual body, when unhindered and untinged by layers of material consciousness and elements, is shining like 10,000 suns. This might seem like an exaggeration or difficult to understand or prove, but The idea is that these elements that we are covering us are actually in incremental layers. Elementally speaking, each layer is 10 times stronger than the previous layer. So that means if you think of the Atma as being 1 millimeter, then the first layer would be 1 centimeter, then the next layer 10 centimeters, then 1 meter. By the time you reach the false ego, it's many, many hundreds of kilometers, conditioning this one small particle of spiritual nature. So that's why we are conditioned. That's why our true nature is not shining forth. But we are eternal, We are not mortal, I remember the first time I broke something in my body. I broke my arm. It twisted, in two areas, like, then I realized, oh my God, this is very fragile, and it's very sobering, actually, Like from then onwards, I was more careful. Children, they have, because they haven't experienced any real, in memory at least, they haven't experienced any accidents, so they're very careless. They just run and jump. But when I broke my arm, I knew, okay, I have to be careful. This body is very fragile. But that's not us. We are not fragile. The soul is eternal. It's permanent, unmoving, etc. Okay, I will stop here. We have another 5 minutes until breakfast. So if somebody has a question or comment, yes, he will give you the mic.
Prabhuji, you were telling about mode of ignorance and how gradually, like the qualities of people in mode of ignorance, they're depressed, lazy, and for them to get out of it, then they have to be active. So that comes in mode of passion. And then you were talking about how both of them is balanced by sattva guna, discipline. So, but how people from the mode of ignorance who are depressed, how will they come to the Shuddha Sattva level then? From Sattva Guna, because as you said, the Sattva Guna, the material Sattva Guna is always tinted with either Rajas or Tamas. So how will they come to the level of Bhakti then?
So, we could give a whole lecture about the modes of nature, but the main point I was trying to make is that so those three modes of nature are in a hierarchy. So mode of ignorance is the lowest. Passion is in the middle, Sattva Guna is higher, but like you mentioned, beyond Sattva Guna there is Vasudhaiva or Shuddha Sattva, the spiritual platform beyond the modes of nature. And Shuddha Sattva can elevate anybody from any position. Anybody from any position can be elevated. And technically also Sattva Guna can elevate somebody who is in the mode of ignorance, like sometimes people make these social experiments where they find some bump, like a beggar in the street, and he's completely dirty, long hair, Sometimes, beggars, they live in the streets for many years and they accumulate, they just wear this cloth on top of each other and accumulate all kinds of things in their pockets, and they haven't changed clothes in years, and long hair. And then somebody comes and says, okay, come on, I bring you to my apartment, I'll shave you, I'll give you new clothes, I'll give you a shower. And then, within a few hours, this person suddenly is clean and looking very presentable. So Sattva Guna can also, because the modes of nature occur in all kinds of combinations, just like the three primary colors, red, blue and yellow, or magenta. In a similar way, these three modes of nature occur in all kinds of different combinations. So there might be somebody who is in a mode of ignorance, but also has some Sattva Guna. Maybe they are in ignorance, they're deprived, they're poor, they're dirty, but they have a good heart. Very often, people who suffer have empathy. If you haven't suffered, you have no empathy usually. So you can very often beggars, they're very generous. You go to a beggar, can you give me something to eat? And they're like, okay, I don't have much, but I'll give you half. Anyway, but I might get something. Somebody will give me something more. So yes, the mode of like bhakti or Shuddha Sattva you mentioned was technically two slightly different things. Bhakti is literally at the core of the nature of any living entity, and Shuddha Sattva is spiritual consciousness, Brahma Bhuta. But both are independent of the modes of nature and can act and, you could say, bless anybody in any position. There is, because there's, you could say, there's three main ways you can initiate somebody in a spiritual path. There's three main ways. There's the Bhagavat Vidhi, there's the Pancharatrika Vidhi, and the Vaidik Vidhi. So the Vaidik Vidhi requires you to have a level of Sattva Guna, a very high level of Sattva Guna. It means your ancestors already, had a culture that inherited to you, and you grow up in this culture, and you assimilate it and live it. And then you have this Vaidic qualification to be initiated and to progress. Then there is the Pancharatrika Vidhi, which requires somebody to have understanding, knowledge. It doesn't matter what background you have, what caste, what gender, what religion, what culture. But if you have knowledge and through understanding, you become qualified. And then you can be initiated. So in one sense it's liberal, it's more liberal, it's not based on birth. Vaidik Vidhi requires you to have an ancestry. Pancharatrika Vidhi does not require any ancestry. And Bhagavat Vidhi is the most liberal. It doesn't even require you to qualify yourself or to have knowledge. Bhagavat Vidhi means, we go on the streets and we chant Hare Krishna, or we give somebody a book. And very often when I distributed books on the street, they were holding a Bockwurst in their hand, So they gave me the Bockwurst, so I hold the Bockwurst for them so they can get the money, I can give them a book, and then I give them their Bockwurst back. So they're not qualified, they're not, but because if there's some, it's called Agyata Sukriti, it's not by intention, it's not by design, it's just by, you could say the way of bhakti. Bhakti might go through a devotee, bhakti might come from Krishna directly, bhakti is independent. So anybody can be elevated. So Bhagavat Vidhi is the most liberal, but at the same time also the most sublime. Pancharatrika Vidhi is all the rules and regulations we're following in the temple. And Vaidik Vidhi is the general Vedic culture that is beyond that, or as a, you could say, catching net beyond that. And Bhagavat Vidhi is what the highest sadhus do. Bhagavat Vidhi is Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, means complete absorption. But that same method can be applied to anybody. Anybody can take advantage of just hearing about Krishna directly. Okay, thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhaktarinda ki jai, Simhachalam Dham ki jai, Maha Bhagavat Prasadam ki jai.